Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I meant to record much earlier than this because I wanted to talk some about TutorCon, but time just got away from me. Every time I wanted to make a video, I just didn't feel like getting in front of the camera. So this is the first time since TutorCon, which was, I don't think it was last weekend, but the weekend before, if I remember correctly. It's been the first time I felt like getting in front of the camera for that. But I don't have a whole lot to say about TutorCon, and I'll cover that a little bit more once I get to that. I am splitting material over the past week or so over several videos, just because I have several things I want to talk about. So I'm going to try to keep them in like specific areas, specific topics like tutor or fiction or whatever I decide to break it up into. So this video, and I'm also going to try, I moved my recording stuff around because I noticed last video I was doing a lot of looking down, and part of it was because I didn't have a good sized viewfinder. I'm not even sure that's the correct term, but I didn't have a good sized screen to look at so I can tell where I was looking at all times. So I did a lot of looking down. Barely looked at y'all at all when I was recording. To start with, so I've got this set up very much like I do for my knitting podcast now. Well, I don't have any finished books to hopefully improve. But I do have a few books that I have been, as much as you can have eye contact through a screen, continuing to read, or that I have picked up reading. I have one book that I decided not to finish. Still using my Jane Austen mug. So I'll start with the book I decided not to finish, and I have purple tea in here. I've been trying to get to read. This is related. I've been wanting to read Courtiers for a while by Valentine Low. Tea, good with just about everything. And I wanted to first finish the Palace Papers before I did that. And I'm going to bring up the cover for that on my Kindle. I could not bring myself to finish it. I found it to be very unprofessional in tone. And I mean, I think that it did a fairly good job of giving pros and cons of everyone's behavior. So, I mean, there were points I didn't necessarily agree with the way things were said, but I didn't feel like there was excessive favoritism towards any one party in the among the Windsors. But regardless, people's actions are going to speak for themselves when you're talking about them. But actually what stopped me is, for one thing, there were points when the author would offer a point of view, and it wasn't provided in a very professional way. It almost felt more like a gossip magazine. And I'm trying to pull up the book so that way I can give you and I can tell you who the author is. Because it's called Palace Papers. Oh, maybe I wrote it down. Oops. Oh, I did write it down. Okay. Good. That's a lot easier than me trying to search for it. So it's called The Palace Papers, and it's by Tina Brown. So I didn't appreciate her tone. I felt that it was very unprofessional. It felt more gossipy than anything else. But honestly, what really made me just cast it aside, because first of all, I had been reading it a while back. Then the Historathon started, and I was like, well, I will finish this later. And then I just picked it up again fairly recently. I don't know if this was an issue earlier in the book, or if it just only came to be something that this author did later on. But what actually made me stop the book, because I was willing to kind of push through some of the other stuff I didn't care for, but what made me stop the book was the disrespect towards the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. I did not appreciate the Queen being referred to as Her Madge. Seriously. That's like walking up to the president and going, "Hey, Mr. Prez." It's just like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be writing a professional biography type book. You're going over the history of the British royal family. It's supposed to be, some good stuff. You're supposed to be at least professional. And I just found that to be disgusting. Like, you don't refer to the Queen of England as Her Madge, not in something official. I'm not even British and I'm offended by that. And I'm not someone who gets offended super easily, but this Queen Elizabeth II was like an icon. You know, she was around forever. She had seen so much stuff. She'd been around for so much. And it was highly disrespectful. I wouldn't even like it. Regardless as to what you might think one way or another about King Charles, or one way or another about anyone else who is royalty, I don't think his Madge or her Madge is appropriate at all when you're writing as a professional. I mean, it sounds like a bratty teenager, to be quite honest with you, or someone who's trying to be hip and cool, and it's just like, no. You're supposed to be like a journalist, an author, like a professional, behave like one. So I couldn't finish it. No. So that one, I don't think I even got halfway through. So I allowed myself to start Courtiers by Valentine Lowe. Valentine Lowe does write like a professional. He has endnotes. He does not refer to people as Her Madge. And he just gives a feel thus far of being a professional, which I can appreciate. So I am enjoying this so far. I'm not very far along. I am trying to finish, at least I have 1 or 2 books I need to finish before Q4 starts for the Historathon. So I have not picked this up in a little while. As you can see, not very far along. There's my Couch Potato magnetic bookmark by Millie's Paper Co. Yeah. But only 15 pages in. Still, enjoying it more than I did the other one. The others that I want to talk about are fiction. So these haven't really changed from what I've been reading. This is just a reread. I've read this many times. I talked about it last couple times. It's just continuing on with Timothy Zahn's original Thrawn trilogy, because he has another trilogy of Thrawn novels that are supposed to be prequels to this. I think it's a trilogy. I haven't finished reading those. No, I'd rather apparently reread the ones I've already read. But second book of this, I'm about halfway through. When I sit down and read it, it goes by pretty quickly. I just need to sit down and read it. Persuasion, this is probably my favorite Jane Austen book, or at least pretty close. I'm getting close to the halfway mark. It's the smallest of the books, but it's the one with the most mature feel. For one thing, the heroine is older than any of the other heroines in any of the other books. Anne Elliot is about 26. Most of the other heroines are in their teens or early 20s. I think the next oldest one might be Emma Woodhouse at 21 or 22. I believe that, excuse me, I believe that Jane Bennet is 20 or 21, and that Lizzie is 19 or 20. And then everyone else ranges somewhere in between, like 16 and 21. But Anne Elliot is quite a bit older, but she has that quiet strength, the more mature feeling that you have when you're out of your teens and you start becoming an adult more. But yeah, this was published after Jane Austen's death, not in the way that Northanger Abbey was, where Northanger Abbey was her first novel, but it was held back. It got caught up in like a publishing limbo and didn't get published till after her death. So her first book and her last book got published around the same time period. But Anne Elliot's always been a favorite of mine. I'm in what I consider the turning point of the book, and it is about halfway through. People who have read the book will know what that turning point is. I don't really want to give away too much for those who have not read the book. This book has made me think about several things. I am taking notes in a little notebook while I'm doing it. While I am reading it, I've got little notebooks for each of my fictional books, just so I can keep track of thoughts without marking up the book too much. But I have several thoughts that have come to my mind while I'm reading this. First of all, some character comparisons between Fanny Price's father and Captain Harville in Persuasion. Both men are Navy men. I'm not sure if Captain Harville's technically retired yet. I do believe Fanny Price's father has, but both of them are/were Navy men. Both of them were rendered incapable of continuing in their duty based on physical injury. Fanny's father turned to alcoholism. Captain Harville turns out very different. He keeps his hands busy. He makes himself useful around the house, even though he's not able to really exercise that much because of his lameness. Meant in the physical lame, not as in like he's lame. In the metaphorical sense. He's not in the metaphorical sense. Fanny's father is in the metaphorical sense, not Captain Harville. Captain Harville is very much of a family man. He's not coarse the way Fanny's father is. They have very similar situations, but the way they conduct themselves are very different, giving, a really... If you compare these two characters in these books, you can see how you can make the situation of their families in very similar circumstances. An injured Navy man father. The circumstances of the families are made entirely different from each other because of these fathers' personalities, if that makes any sense. Because Mr. Price was uncouth, turned to drunkenness, a very selfish type person, very much focused on his own wants and desires, barely caring about his family, not caring that his house was dark and noisy and just not a pleasant place to be. So that's his personality, makes the situation for his family it prevents them from becoming better. There really is only the escape for the boys into the Navy, and the girls risk becoming as bitter and as unformed in their minds as their mother has become. Versus Captain Harville and his family. Captain Harville and his wife, they keep, even though he too, injured out of the Navy, their house, even though it's small and they aren't really that much better off than Fanny's family, they keep their house very welcoming. It feels brighter. The children are loved. The father, he might not be able to go and work physically in the Navy, but he's making nets. He's doing carpentry. He's doing varnishing. He's making toys for the children. He does what he can to be useful so that his wife isn't doing everything. He's not just sitting there just wallowing in self-pity or wallowing in alcohol and in the company of those who are on leave and not family men, who maybe don't have the same responsibilities or goals that he does or priorities that he does. So just very vastly different families, even though they're in similar situations. And where Fanny was very unhappy when she returned home and felt embarrassed, felt she was essentially, she hated to express this, but she did feel ashamed. She did feel, I can't pull the word out of my head right now. I had a better one written down, but I don't have it here with me. But she did feel ashamed this was her family, and to introduce them to people, it was difficult for her because this was not an association that she found. It was something she was proud to be associated with, because she had been raised to have a higher mindset, to expect more. Whereas even though the Harvilles, like her family, don't have the money, I think that she could be as happy with the Harvilles as she could be at Mansfield Park. Yeah, Mansfield Park. Because they are kind people. They care about the family. They don't keep this house that is just basically constantly in riot. You know, someone yelling at someone else and just constant ruffled feelings. I think she could be happy with the Harvilles, just because of the differences in the way the heads of the family had handled things, and then how that affects the load on their wives, and then the way the children grow up. So I couldn't help but be struck by Harville versus Price. The other thing, and I want to pursue it more later on, maybe jot down some notes, I was thinking, and even though it didn't really come up here, maybe it was something about how Mrs. Croft refers to her husband as Admiral Croft, and usually in the book he is just called the Admiral. Actually, I'm not sure if she calls him by his first name now. Yes, she does call him my dear Admiral. So something I want to look through and take note of is of the heroines and how they refer to their love interests and what that says about their social interactions with each other. For example, like, okay, do they start off calling each other something and then that changes? Or do they always call each other one thing based off of how they met? And then also, even maybe I want to see how other couples that are not the main couples refer to each other. Because I think of, you have people like Fanny Price, who refers to, I always mix it up. I think her love interest is Edmund, and Edward belongs to her name will come to me eventually. Eleanor. So I believe that Edward belongs to Fanny Price and Edmund belongs to Eleanor. But both of those young men, they are called from the beginning in the book by their first names, by their respective love interests. Probably because they were met as family, is my thought process. Eleanor met Edward as the brother of her sister-in-law. So that's probably why she called him by his first name right from the go. And Edmund and Fanny grew up as cousins. But, then you look at people like Emma, who Mr. Knightley is Mr. Knightley, even though Mr. Knightley is her brother-in-law. So very similar situation, you could argue, to that of Eleanor and Edward. Although you could argue it's even closer of a relationship than Eleanor and Edward, since technically Edward's sister is Eleanor's sister-in-law, not Edward himself being her brother-in-law. Thought I'd clear that up. So I wasn't saying that he wasn't her sister-in-law, which he's not either. But anyway, so I'd like to go through, because there are certain couples that call each other by their first name when they're married, but there are others, or in a relationship, but there are others who also continue to call each other by their honorific, for lack of a better term. I mean, I think of Mrs. Bennet, who still calls her husband Mr. Bennet. I believe that Mr. Bennet also calls her Mrs. Bennet. But you have Admiral Croft. I'm sorry about that. I keep hitting my shawl pin. You have Admiral Croft, who calls his wife by her first name, Sophia, to the point where he wishes that all women were called Sophia because it would be so much simpler. um, so I do want to maybe dive into it a little bit more. There might not be really anything to cover there. Maybe a slightly rambly blog post, but I'd like to delve in a little bit more why certain characters choose to call each other by their first name, why others choose to go with an honorific, and what that says about them, in their social status and in their social standing with each other personally, how close they are. So those are the thoughts that I got out of Persuasion this time around. This has always been one of my favorites. I usually read this a little quicker than I have been, but I'm trying to enjoy it and not rush my way through it, taking notes here and there. Silmarillion. So, Vinod, if you are still keeping up with me, I know it's been a while since I've talked about anything that's fantasy, but I am back into the Silmarillion. I actually got back into reading this again, even though I've been meaning to. I got back into reading this again for the most randomest? That's not a word. Most random of reasons. I had a really detailed review I wrote on this particular edition of the Silmarillion on Amazon. And the reason I wrote such a detailed review is people kept complaining about what they considered too few pictures in this book. And so, besides describing the book, how it looked on the cover, and the ruins on the outside of the pages, I also made a point of going through the illustration contents and explaining, like, these are the ones that are full page, these are the ones that are just little designs, so people knew exactly how many pictures there were and what that illustration's contents meant, so that people wouldn't be fooled just by people going, oh, there's not enough pictures. So I had someone actually reach out to me on Facebook out of the blue to thank me for the review, that he ended up picking up the book on Abe Books because of the review. So it made me go, oh yeah, I've been meaning to go back into reading this, and I knew that I was pretty close to Beren and Luthien. So I went ahead, picked it up again the other day, and I am right. I have just gotten into Beren and Luthien. So Beren has just been sent off into his suicide mission to get a Silmaril. So I'm excited. This has been the story that I have been waiting for. The highlight of the whole point, almost, that I'm reading the Silmarillion. I also have the lays of Beren and Luthien, the book that's just Beren and Luthien's got all the different versions that Tolkien wrote. I have that as well elsewhere. But I have to read through the Children of Húrin and the Fall of Gondolin, the Fall of Numenor. I think all of those occur before. Well, no, the Fall of Numenor, I believe, occurs after Beren and Luthien, but maybe Fall of Gondolin does too. I think the Fall of Gondolin does occur after Beren and Luthien, because we've started talking about Gondolin, but it hasn't fallen yet. And actually, the Children of Húrin is after it as well. It's almost concurrent, but it is after as well. So I might be able to read Beren and Luthien next. I'll have to check and see. But I am enjoying this. I'm happy to be in Beren and Luthien. Finally, this has been something I've been looking forward to. I find it interesting, just aspects of Thingol in particular, where he really had no intention of ever keeping his word to Luthien that he would spare Beren. The only reason why he sent him on the quest was so he could keep his word in. He wouldn't technically be the one killing him. It would be, Sauron who'd be killing him. I guess it's, I'm trying to remember, no, it's Morgoth who has it in the crown. So, yeah, it would be him who was killing him. Not Thingol. But Thingol does say right here I sell not to elves or men, those whom I love and cherish above all treasure. And if there were hope or fear that Beren should come ever back alive to Menegroth, he should not have looked again upon the light of heaven, though I had sworn it. So his pride for who he is as one of these high elves, and his disdain for Beren as, I guess they're called the secondborn, I think is what I think called the dwarves the secondborn. Regardless, the later children of Iluvatar. He looks down upon Beren as a man instead of because he's not an elf, as a mortal. There we go. So much that his pride would even allow him to break his word to bring about his daughter's unhappiness, to besmirch his own honor, to protect his pride. So it's an interesting look at Thingol, and actually I feel like it points ahead to Thingol's eventual fate. It's, to his doom, to use a Tolkien term. So, yes, I do know the stories a bit just from having listened to TolkienTube, but it's interesting, since I do know some things that come on next, I can go, oh, okay, Thingol is showing his major fault here, and this is going to come back and to bite him, because he did not deal honestly with Beren. And then the last thing I want to show you for this particular video, after I take a drink of tea, is the book journal. I'm actually going to stop this here. I will start showing this again in the next video, because actually I think everything in here ties in better. No, they tie into both two different videos. Okay, anyway, I will stop this here. These two entries work better for the next two videos I'm making. So, thank you very much for joining me. I think I was a little bit disjointed. I will probably have to do some editing to tighten this up a little bit. But I do appreciate you lasting through this long. And I will see you for the next video. God bless. Bye.